And hi, and welcome to a new version, if you will, of Truth Bombing the Con. My name is Patrick Lovell, and for those of you who have been so kind and opened up your, let's just say, bandwidth to what I've been dropping for about the last year and a half, you've known that I've been pretty adamant about a specific sort of initiative, a specific framing that everything is about quite frankly, stemming from corruption. And what I've done as a muckraking journalist and a producer that produced the 5-part series, The Con, that you can find at www.thecon.tv, but also the podcast that I did called The New Untouchables that you can find online. And then also I think I'm up to 421 truth bombs. I don't know how many hours that equates to over the course of the last year and a half on Patrick Lovell Truth Bombs The Con. But really, everything I've been building for about the last year and a half is sort of a pathway to what I'm calling the Clean New Deal. And I had this idea last spring, and I've just been trying very hard to generate a movement based on the information that I have that hopefully people can disseminate to understand that whatever your issue is, without understanding the core of what corruption has become in our country, that we don't really have a chance to fix anything unless we understand exactly what we are and how we got here and what we're going to do to fix this. And I made a proclamation last night on Twitter, for example, or I should say X, that I'm sorry, I've got this frog in my throat. But I said, I'm making a promise to all the professionals out there, to all of the people that we depend on to make our society safe, whether it's flying in airplanes that we depend on to fly, whether it's getting in, buildings that we expect to stand in, elevators to work, and street lights to work, and all of the rest of it, that, a modern day society requires professionals in a lot of things that have to come together to make a society function safely. Now, I've always in these truth bombs in my collective work and everything else, if the airline industry had the track record that the financial industry had, we'd be dealing with a lot of carnage. We'd be dealing with a lot of unfortunate death and destruction that would be absolutely unnecessary if you understood how things are actually designed and how they work. And in the moment of the now, and I'll get to my wonderful co-host people that are going to be involved with this moving forward, and I'll get to that in a minute. But I just want to, in a nutshell, the elephant in the room, because of just the carnage that's happening in the Middle East. I mean, that's one thing that's got our attention, but of course, all things continuation of Donald Trump and fraud, and the upcoming election, and so many other questions. It's really hard to keep track of what are the priorities. It's really hard to keep track when we're basically overblown, overwhelmed with information, disinformation, too much information, wrong information, reactionary circus, all of those things, so that we can't just literally compartmentalize and understand what's going on by seeing the forest for the trees. And so from this effort, I got very fortunate, and my colleague Roseanne and I, who unfortunately can't attend this particular recording, but will in more to come. But I met the two gentlemen that are on the screen right now, and it's my great pleasure and honor to bring these two gentlemen into the conversation, because these people have inspired me to know that, well, the message is actually working, and it's working in the right direction, because these are the two types of people that I was hoping that I would actually meet. And so I'm going to start with my colleague, I guess I could call him at the moment, a gentleman his name is Dan Schaffer. He's on my upper left, and below him is a gentleman by the name of Kevin Howard. And I'll introduce Dan first. Dan, that's a bit of a long runway to try to get you into the dialogue. If you wouldn't mind, please tell us who you are, and what about the Clean New Deal had some bit of an attraction to you, but what your come from is and what's important to you. Let's start there.
Well, yeah, I'm Dan Schaffer. I run two podcasts now. One of them was for the Alliance Party. Another one is called Democracy on the Move. And over the years, I've become far more familiar with what's going on in the government. in many different areas, corruption being, I think, the root of many of these problems that we're suffering from these days. I did get involved in politics. I've been an engineer my whole life and pretty much happy with that, but always interested in politics to some degree. What happened in 2017, which is like the worst year of my life, not only from a political perspective because of who took office during that year. We all know who I'm talking about. But I had a couple tragedies, and my son basically came down with type 1 diabetes and a couple of other of these autoimmune diseases. And he was in college at the time, right? And he almost died from it. And it was a series of errors, that him getting misdiagnosed and so on. He finally got the right medical attention. And in two instances during that year, he ended up in ICU. And one of those instances, I live in St. Louis here. He lives out in Los Angeles. The second incident, which we didn't know what was going on with him, he almost died. And I remember getting on the plane to fly out to Los Angeles, and I was crying. I was like, I'm never going to see my son again. And it's something any parent should never go through. And anyone who's a parent out there knows you would gladly put your life down for your children. Well, so everything turned out okay. He got diagnosed correctly, and he's a type 1 diabetic, like I said, so he's getting the help he needs. He's back on his feet. You wouldn't know that that he has had these issues. But I started digging into politics a little bit more at that time, because not only did I see what was happening with our nation during that time, but also I became very concerned about, where does insulin come from? Where are all these critical medicines being manufactured? And I found out that the critical parts of insulin, to a large degree, come from China and from India. And both of these countries are countries that we have tenuous relationships with. Even though India is the world's largest democracy, you see what's happening in India right now. They're drifting toward authoritarianism, just like the United States. And so I felt very vulnerable about this. And I thought, why is it that our politicians talk a great deal about individual health care, but when it comes right down to it, they don't really care. It just is a football for them to punt back and forth across the field. And meanwhile, people die. And this whole situation was exacerbated during the time of COVID, where you really began to see what was going on behind the scenes in terms of political posturing versus really solving the problems of the people. Then I got to dial it all the way back to 2010, 2011-ish, when the 2008 financial crisis was having its toll, and it was working its way through the system. And I was a big fan of Obama up until he took office, actually, because he was extremely ineffective. And specifically with regards to 2008 financial crisis, I think his negligence in pursuing the problems with this crisis, in pursuing the perpetrators of this crisis through Eric Holder, his attorney general, Obama's overall negligence is criminal. Nobody ever went to jail for what they did to millions of people across the states. And Obama's first reaction was not to bail out Wall Street, was not to bail out Main Street. His first reaction was to bail out Wall Street. And he just kind of wiped his hands of the whole thing. Eric Holder goes off, I think in 2015, he goes off, he resigns as attorney general, goes back to work for the same law firm he came from. I forgot the name of
Covington and Burling.
Covington Burling, yeah.
One of the big boys.
One of the big boys. And guess what Covington Burling does but defend all the financial companies. Well, not all of them, but it defends a number of the financial companies that were at the center of this 2008 financial crisis. So it's not even being hidden anymore. This revolving door exists there. And, I'm also very much anti-MAGA. But on the other hand, I understand their motivation, because this is a long string of lies that has been launched on the U.S. public going way back. I was out in the streets in 2003 before we invaded Iraq. I was out in the streets carrying signs protesting the upcoming war, along with millions of other people across the globe and millions of other people across the U.S. actually. Didn't make any difference though, but I knew we were being lied to. But the patriotism took hold in this country, and George W. Bush and company including most disappointingly, his Secretary of State, Colin Powell, who caved underneath this pressure and perpetuated this lie all the way up to the UN. And even countries like France wouldn't join us. And how much closer to a country can we get than France? France is our brother in democracy, really. And here we are, right? And so we've been lied to a lot by our government, and the media is in on it. So that being the case, I know that I identify with the frustration of MAGA, but I think the problem I have with MAGA is they want to throw it all away. They want to throw away the baby with the bathwater. I still think at the end of the day, our Constitution means something. It's just that we have a whole crop of politicians in there that are operating outside the limits of the Constitution. And as I've often said in the past, I can rob a bank legally. I can legally rob a bank. All I have to do is change the laws, make bank robbery legal. And that's essentially what happened in the 2008 financial crisis. It may not have been legal, but it's legal insofar as I'm concerned, because if nobody's willing to prosecute you for the crime, it's legal. It's essentially legal. So this is very frustrating, and I think it's to a large degree, it's led to the downfall of this country. We've also gotten into some peripheral issues like extreme racism, white supremacy gets mixed into it, religion gets mixed into it. It becomes a very toxic brew, and everybody's drinking from this toxic brew. And there seems to be no way to really disseminate the truth out there, other than, like, the other night, well, a couple months ago, I guess it was now, I tuned into The Con, which is something that, Patrick, you produced. And thank you very much for that, because it's a 5-part series that really takes apart this whole, insofar as the 2008 financial crisis, really dissects the whole thing and brings it out in the open. And, I was just shaking my head the whole time, because I remember going through all this stuff. I just didn't know the depth of it until I watched The Con. And so that brought me in touch with you, Patrick. I don't remember exactly how you and I got in touch in the first place, but I know I was
You'd made a comment on one of my my posts on X, and then we just had a dialogue.
Oh, okay, that's where it went. Yeah, but I just, because I get a hold of a lot of people through online, through social media, and I've gotten a hold of a lot of really good people, such as yourself, that are really going out there to make a difference. And I've been wanting to make a difference for a long time. That's why I did the podcasts, and I want to continue going with some sort of organization. So I don't mean to bore you too much. Just I'm basically a lifelong engineer. I see how things work. My whole idea in life is to look at the systems the systems that exist out there, try to debug the systems, figure out what's wrong with it, and go back and fix it. I'm not a MAGA person, because I don't want to take a hammer to the whole system and break it. I mean, you're not going to fix anything by just smashing it. You fix it by figuring out what's wrong. And there's always in any system you deal with, there's always some root causes in there. And all you have to do is find out what those root causes are and fix those root causes. In our case, the roots run pretty deep. But I think that we can do it, and we must do it. If we're going to survive as a democracy, let's not throw away our democracy because we're upset with how it turned out so far. Let's fix what we have and move forward. I think our forefathers back in 1787, I think when they created the Constitution, had tremendous amount of insight, but they made some big mistakes too. No doubt about it. The electoral system was a big mistake, in my opinion. It was a result of a compromise with the southern states to keep us as one union. I get that, but it needs to be done away with, because it's not a popular election system. There's other things that need to be rewired as well. The Clean New Deal, in my opinion, is something that will not only allow us to find out what's going on with these systems and fix them, but give us a path forward and give us the motivation. Because the only way we're going to fix this thing is to get a lot of people on board, get them all rowing in the same direction, and everybody watching where we go. I don't put my blind trust in anybody, but as long as we're all keeping an eye where the ship is heading, I think we're going to go in the right direction. Right now we're heading for the rocks, but I think we can steer the ship around and go in a different direction. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, boy, I can't thank you enough for that terrific insight, and especially the human side of it. Considering your son and everything else, but you touched upon some keystones there that I think are a great segue to Kevin. Primarily his comment about Colin Powell. Kevin, what's your story, my friend?
Yeah, well, Patrick, thank you so much for inviting me to participate, and Dan, and it's a shame that Roseanne is not here because obviously she would add so much to the conversation. But yeah, I just before I even get into my story, I want to say, Dan, I was moved hearing your story. I've known some of it from our previous conversations, but it is impactful to realize the extent to which what America has become impacts our individual lives. So when I look at my individual life, it's the story that millions of Americans have gone through over these last 40 years. In my particular case, I was raised by a single parent, a single mother, right, in the Bronx, New York. She was an immigrant who grew up in Panama and came to the States at 14 and made her way. And she raised me and my brother. And because she grew up outside of America, she had a vivid idea of the privilege, of the blessing that is to be born in America and the opportunities you get here. And so she raised me and my brother, instilled in us that tremendous appreciation for being here and what opportunity this gives us. She invested in our education, invested in the best Catholic school education she could find in the Bronx, in New York metropolitan area. And by the time I graduated from high school, I was excited. I was ready to embark on my journey. And so I jumped right in, and I enlisted to 4 years active duty in the United States Army, where I was a nuclear biological chemical NCO, in a first generation M1 tanking unit that was a member of NATO. And yes, you mentioned Colin Powell. While I served, and this was in the mid 80s, not only Ronald Reagan was my commander in chief, but Colin Powell was as a lieutenant general at the time, was our Fifth Corps commander for the Spearhead Division. And it was a heady time to serve our country in Europe at the height of the Cold War in the mid 80s. But after my military service, I went to school, got educated. We talked earlier, but my experience at the University of Houston, and then I embarked on my career. And I started as doing a 1 year stint as a FEMA lead disaster assistance loan officer, for the Northridge earthquake. Once again, serving fellow Americans in a time of a natural disaster, one of the worst in U.S. history. And then I built this career starting as a small business banker, helping entrepreneurs build their businesses, start their businesses, achieve their dreams. As that career became successful and more successful, I moved up into larger businesses and became a commercial banker, a middle market commercial banker, when the financial crash hit. And the thing about the financial crash for me and the journey that I came on is that this is when I knew for sure, right, that the American dream that I had been chasing was actually a mirage, because I didn't see what happened in October of 2008 when I was a middle market banker, commercial banker at Wachovia. I didn't see this thing coming. I had lived, I did everything right, invested my money, served the community, or what have you. And all of a sudden, I went from a recurring six-figure income. And before long, didn't take long for me to turn around and start selling Medicare Advantage plans for $17 an hour. I mean, I lost my home, I lost my savings, I lost my retirement, I lost my credit, I lost my marriage. I mean, this is what happened to millions of Americans, right? And 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 yet I was consumed with, how could this happen to me? How could this happen in America? The very thing I was raised by my mother was that this is the place where if you did it right, you could achieve great things and live a great life. And so I embarked on my own investigation. And while my investigation did culminate in Patrick's incredible 5-part documentary series, The Con, My investigation leading into that discovery, when Patrick released the con, I think it was in 2020,
Yeah.
was that the demarcation line for what has become our American nightmare for so many American people, right, was an event that occurred back in 1971. And this is the event. It is a document called the Powell Memorandum. And the Powell Memorandum was written by a very powerful attorney named Lewis Powell. And he wrote it to the US Chamber of Commerce in 1971. And basically, it was this call to arms to the American corporations and American wealth. And basically, it said, in very thoughtful, reasoned, measured terms, it said that the American corporation and American wealth has lost control of the country. Because what were we facing in 1971, right? Basically, after 20 plus years after World War II, and the GI Bill, the expansion of education, the expansion of home ownership and everything, the civil rights movement, the equal rights movement, the
Great Society.
all the Great Society. Okay, what he was saying is that the shared prosperity that was occurring in America, we still had problems, but the wealth and income inequality was as narrow as it ever had been. But the problem was that you couldn't control the American people. They were becoming independent of wealth, and therefore they could hold wealth accountable. And so you had all types of movements going on, an anti-war movement. Dr. King was about to march a poor man's march on Washington, cutting across all races, ethnicities, to say, to bridge the gap even further, right? So
Based on
basically,
economic systemic racism, yes.
absolutely. So Lewis Powell was saying, hey, we've lost control. The problem with shared prosperity is we can't control the masses. And so we need to embark on spending as much money as we possibly can to influence the media, the government, and our university system towards the interests of the American corporate interests. And then they embarked on doing it. Richard Nixon appointed him to the Supreme Court in '72, and he became one of the leading corporatist jurists in American history. I mean, literally, the American corporation has greater rights than the American citizen. It's a super citizen, largely because of the influence of Lewis Powell. But if you look at the economics and the political changes since that memo was written, all in each of those institutions, which the democracy relies on, right? The media has been totally moved from a not-for-profit public service when the legendary reporters like Walter Cronkite was reporting, right? Then the news was not self-sustaining, was supported by the entertainment divisions, and they did not have to do this ratings game, right? Instead, by the '80s, we turned it into a self-supporting line of business that allowed the anchors to earn millions of dollars, which means that it could be bought. This is exactly what Powell was saying. We need to invest lots of money so that our story can be told. Everything can be told from that perspective. And so you had the co-opting of the media with the creation of CNN and all these things in the '80s, right? And Fox News or whatever. So this is how Americans get their story, right? You had the co-opting of the government, where we're going to constantly put judges on the court, pro-business judges on the court, decade after decade, until you get to a point where you get Citizens United. And unlike individual American citizens who are capped at how much they can donate to a campaign, you have multi-billion-dollar corporations who can donate open-endedly, under this thin veil that they're not working directly for the campaigns, but they always seem to align, right? Okay, you have an American university system that used to be this is where, so much strength from the civil rights movement, so much strength from the anti-war movement, came out of the college campuses. Where is everybody? Where is everyone now? Why? Because the best and brightest teachers are not in the classroom anymore. They're incentivized to write, to publish, to work for the corporations, to be the research and development for American corporations. Take for example what happened with the development of the vaccine for COVID. Right, this was publicly funded research, your mRNA research, publicly funded through the university systems, but somehow American pharmaceuticals had proprietary claims on research that they didn't fund, right? But see, this is my point. So this is how the universities were co-opted, in that the best and the brightest teachers who were helping our students think for themselves, right? Oh no, we can't have that because you can't control people who can think for themselves. And so these were the pillars that were put into place that ultimately led through the 90s to Bill Clinton participating in the final deregulation, the final dismantling of the New Deal. I mean, it was Bill Clinton who ended FDR's New Deal by allowing Glass-Steagall to be repealed, by then passing on in the lame duck Congress before he turned it over to W, legislation that made credit default swaps and things like that legal again. We had banned this thing 80 years earlier, right? Okay, right. He had deregulated complex financial instruments. So it was like, graft on steroids that Bill Clinton, after he gave Wall Street what Nixon couldn't do, what Eisenhower couldn't do, and stuff like that, what Reagan dreamed of doing. So of course, he sets up in Harlem, New York. Bill is not from New York. He sets up in Harlem, New York. Hillary's from Chicago. Bill is from Arkansas. They set up in Harlem, New York, so that Wall Street can thank them, right, with the Clinton Foundation, and then turn around and give Hillary the Senate seat, right? And she's supposed to be holding them accountable. So this is the tee up to how they created those phony, mortgage-backed securities, collateral debt obligations, misrated, that is so exposed in the con and stuff like that, that destroyed pensioners, that destroyed homeowners, that destroyed my career and stuff like that. So I am here. Once I realized that, and once I came through to the con, I realized that so few people, just like Patrick says, know this. So few people know the story. We've just been told to move on with our lives, but it's only getting worse. So I'm here in full-throated support of the Clean New Deal because we need to make our fellow Americans aware of why their lives have become an American nightmare and how they can go about reclaiming their sovereignty. How can they go about reclaiming their claim to the American dream? How can we get our country back, right? The transitional program is the Clean New Deal, and I'm excited to participate.
Wow, Kevin, that I cannot be more inspired by both of you, and I'm just so proud that in these ongoing efforts, where sometimes I felt like I was Fred Flintstone banging my head against the brick wall, that suddenly there's some holes of light in peers, two incredibly capable and very distinguished guys that with this incredible roadmap, which I know is out there. And I know that there's millions of more like us that we have to electrify, to somehow inspire to join us based on what I just heard you guys say. Now, interestingly enough, when you mentioned 1971, I thought you were going to go initially into fiat currency, right? I thought that you were going to go into the relinquishing of the gold standard and all things of Bretton Woods, right? But boy, the other side of that was the Powell memo, and it was the FEC versus the railroad. I can't remember which the preliminary sort of Supreme Court case that led to Citizens United. But all of this stuff is so diabolically engineered. There's no other way to look at it when you pull it back and you understand who the money is and everything else. And I'll give you guys a quick antidote to that story. I'll never forget as long as I live. This was one of the most remarkable experiences I ever had. I went to what is known as it's right across the street from Trump's hotel, which is of course under the investigation of Letitia James in New York because of the lies of the appraisal value and so forth. But it was, boy, it's God, the largest lobbying sort of effort is under this one building, and I can't think of the name of it. Like Exxon's involved, the Heritage Foundation, all of these giant billionaire apparatuses. The American Enterprise Institute. That's where I was. So I had this interview with this guy by the name of Wallison is his last name. And he, as it turns out, was general counsel. Get a load of this in terms of, we all like to think about Orwellian and in terms of these crafting scenarios of what you just both touched upon. And he was this sort of, he was, what is the word I want to use to describe his role with the federal, with the FCC? Oh my God, it's not the FCC. I'm really screwing this up. Anyway, Wallace, and I'll come back to it. He was the general counsel for the guy from Merrill Lynch, who was which was, I'm really destroying this, guys. Please, I know we're doing this live, and it's going to come to me because
I'd love to bail you out, but I don't know the names.
Okay, during President Reagan's administration, he gave this famous speech where he said, "Government is the problem," right? And the word
that was Reagan's
Reagan himself. Speech. Yeah,
right. And the most terrifying language is, "I'm here from the government. I'm here to help you out." And so this is what I was trying to get to. So his point person on Wall Street was from Merrill Lynch, a guy by the name of Don Regan. His general counsel was this guy named Wallison. Wallison, as it turns out, is placed on the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission following the 2008 crisis, and he's there as this guy that's going to basically blame what was then, the victims. Quite frankly, his whole role was to blame, the Community Reinvestment Act, and so his whole 4 decades long march was to be this role similar to what Kevin mapped out in terms of what took place during what led to Citizens United in that time frame and the Powell memo, because of this incredibly insidious, brilliant cacophony of these organizations. And this guy Wallison was at the top with Don Regan. And I'll never forget interviewing him about the 2008 great financial crisis and how he came down and why he wrote what he did on the Federal Crisis Inquiry Commission. And at the end of it, after we turned off the lights and he realized we knew everything. We knew everything in every single direction. We knew every, law. We knew what they did, when they did it, how they did it, but we weren't getting it from the actual sources themselves until this moment with Wallison, who was there from the very beginning. And he looks at me and he's like, "It's all Orwellian, isn't it?" And he was just projecting what I'd always had intuited the whole time, that these guys knew exactly what they were doing, which leads me to the most important part of what we will reveal as we construct the Clean New Deal, is ultimately what we revealed with our investigation through the con, which led me to what the Federal Reserve did after the 2008 great financial crisis by utilizing what is known as Federal Reserve Act 13.3 illegally to plow tens of trillions of dollars into the system that bankrupted the world. Quite frankly, that's what I was getting from Wallison. They always knew they had an ace card. It's like going into the casino and betting the house and knowing you can never lose because you've got, the next day you're going to double whatever your losses were that night because you can. It's called the full faith and credit of the United States. And ultimately, as we go through this whole situation, as we realize through the viewers that here are professionals, people in their own lives that are humans, that have gone through the gauntlet, that have had so much taken from them, so much suffering, so much unnecessary pain due to what is simply corruption. This cacophony of misaligned incentives, of what we call perverse incentives, that ultimately came from what you both intuited, which was deregulation, desupervision, decriminalization. Because we all know that you cannot have a democracy without the integrity of law, without separation of powers, without a degree of common sense. But most importantly, to what we're all talking about, what Dan so eloquently revealed was that, look, there's something wrong in Dodge when we know the system isn't adding up, when the system isn't working the way it's designed to. When you find the flaw and you discover the flaw is the point, and the point is to basically everything for themselves and nothing for everyone else, which again is the new tyranny. So as we try to build the case to America, I'll start with this and I'll look for you guys to, provide some closing comments for this first effort. But when you look around at the moment, we know that we're running out of time. There is no time. It's 2023. As I've said to both of you, as we've had dialogues, sidebar in preparation for this, but also as I've said on my social media, particularly on X, is that it's 2023. It is not 1987. We were aware of a lot of problems in 1987. It's not 1991 or 93 or 94. We knew of a lot of problems then. It's not 1997 or 98. We knew of a lot of massive problems then. 2001 was another pivotal moment, but 2001, 2008, and then everything that happened since is a continuation of what we're trying to expose to the American people, that there are no solutions coming from the powers that be. They are the problem. So when we look at the Republican, for example, debates last night, nobody on that stage is addressing what we're talking about. Nobody's even addressing the elephant in the room on that side, which is, of course, all things Trump and the fact that he led an insurrection, the fact that, he's up to his eyeballs in fraud. But for the audience, and what we're going to reveal as we move forward, and one of my objectives is that everything the government is demonstrating that Donald Trump is being indicted for and thus ultimately guilty of, in fact, given what we just saw with Sam Bankman-Fried and the fact that he got found guilty on 7 counts of fraud within a year, should really put into perspective what the Justice Department has not done with regards to Donald Trump. And there's a lot of questions along those lines, of course. But the bottom line is that the government is demonstrating that Donald Trump used deceptive acts and practices, using illegal documentation fraud on a massive level, with racketeering, using criminal attorneys and judges to basically, in this case, steal an election. Concurrently, which is hilarious, nobody in media has put 2 and 2 together, as that was his actual business practices at the Trump Organization, using illegal documentation fraud and misrepresentation of warranties to get, hyperinflate his value so he could get loans. That's part of the business model that we show you the entirety of our financial system pulled off with regards to the 2008 great financial crisis that then led to them walking with tens of trillions of dollars. This Donald Trump situation, as big as it is literally a sideshow to what I just revealed to you. But further to that, the Democratic Party, the choices are, you've got Donald Trump and all of the baggage that I just revealed to you, including, of course, the insurrection and everything that, unfortunately, the Supreme Court in Minnesota didn't hold him accountable for, so that he can actually run on the ballot, which is ridiculous to me. It's like, why did we have there was no Civil War when you consider what the Supreme Court came up with last night, because it's ridiculous. It's just the statute is written to prevent exactly what they decided to rule against. That's, all of this insanity is happening in our country, let alone the potentiality of World War III. And the Democratic side of it is, look, you've got to have Biden protect democracy. And without it, that's the only choice, right? But we all know, because we've been around the block a few times over the course of the last 4 or 5 decades, exactly what Biden's been involved with. And it's not comparing apples to apples. To me, Donald Trump's corruption is just a consequence of the corruption that, quite frankly, the establishment that Biden's been very much involved with made inevitable. Do you follow what I'm saying? It's like all of these things are just a continuum. And until the United States citizenry understands the level and the magnitude of carnage that destroyed tens of millions of people, but ultimately it's so easy to prove. This stuff, I hate to sound like Sherlock Holmes, but it's elementary. The level of depravity within illegal reps and warranties and deceptive acts and practices in the entire food chain that we've proved is like almost unfathomable to most people, that it's possible that the Federal Reserve met behind closed doors 98 times between 2008 and 2009 to basically pull a smoke and mirrors that the entirety of media played along with, to not be able to expose that we just simply provided tens of trillions of dollars to a criminal financial system whose entire model is built and predicated on almost everything that you said, Kevin, as a consequence of the Powell memo moving forward. So anyway, there's a lot more to it than that. But that being said, this whole purpose is to create a clean new deal to purge the corruption, to basically be a modern day Pecora hearing, to basically make clean and lay bare this tragedy of corruption to the American people that need to understand that this is a fixable problem, but that we're the only ones that are going to provide the information that unfortunately the entirety of the system has decided they're going to bet the future in the history of the world on us not getting it. Comments?
Wow, that's a lot. I would point out one thing that I'm obviously not as well versed as you two are on the financial part of the corruption. But one thing I know just from looking at this from the outside in is that there has been this parallel effort, and I think Kevin, you hit upon that when you talked about the corruption of media, because the message going out to the public is, I think Eric Holder said it himself, that it's too big to fail. The banks are too big to fail. And people bought into that. And this whole, there's a parallel effort. On one side, there's this financial effort, which is setting us up for financial fraud. And I think the guys that are perpetuating this understand that the American people are going to catch on to this and they can't get away with it. So what do? They create this myth about other things that are going on. You know, and they throw all kinds of stuff at it. They throw CRT at it, you know, critical race theory, or they throw DEI at it. They mix, as I mentioned earlier, they mix in concepts of Christian nationalism and white supremacy and so on. These are all sideshows, including the abortion issue. It's all a sideshow because while people are fighting each other and divided, they can't get together and figure out what's really taking place underneath them. So the thing about the Clean New Deal that I like is, yeah, we're gonna go after these financial criminals out there that have been perpetuating this issue, but we also need to educate people in terms of set aside all of our differences because we have a common enemy to go after at this point. We're always gonna have differences. I'm gonna have different opinion from anybody else, but the United States is all about compromise, and that's what Congress is refusing to do at this point because we become so polarized that we can't even get Congress, you can't even get the House of Representatives together to elect a speaker. This is being done on purpose. And this also has to be addressed because if you're looking, it's a magician. I wouldn't say a magician. He told me he's going to take my watch. I'm sitting there at a table right across from him. He says, I'm going to take your watch and you're not going to know it. And by golly, he did it. I was even aware that he was, I was aware of it because suddenly I looked down, my watch isn't there anymore. And it wasn't a miracle or anything like that. He just learned how to manipulate people, learned how to distract me. Even though I knew I was being distracted, he still took my watch. And I think that's what's happening in America right now. There's this concerted effort to distract people, to steal things from them while they're not looking because they're distracted by something else. And this is where we have to really buckle down with people and say, look, this is the financial situation. These are financial criminals that have taken your money, but watch out because they're also taking your soul. So,
well, they bought the whole system too. Just a quick segue to what you're going to say, Kevin. But what they've been able to do, because of what you both identified, is the revolving door. So the brightest and the best in our system that know all of the rules, that know every sort of juggernaut of mental or legal gymnastics that are associated with. I mean, that's the whole thing. You know, I come at this thing like a producer in a film, and I always a filmmaker, and I always come back to what I think is the best metaphor of all. From the great 1998 Usual Suspects film starring Kevin Spacey, when he said the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. That's the situation here. It's this giant amalgamation of misinformation because it is a huge machine. But when you get to the core of it and you understand that ultimately this is the biggest betrayal of all, that our legal system was like, look, the American people are expendable. They're not going to be able to rise up. They don't have the information. They don't know how to fight this system. So what we're going to do is we're going to steal from them. Like you just said, we're going to take their property. They took tens of millions of people's property during the 2008 great financial crisis illegally. Now, the bottom line is, I don't want to get into the semantics of, yeah, there were a lot of people that were over their heads that didn't know what they were doing, that maybe took out more than they could chew, but they didn't understand they were getting played the whole time. The bottom line is this whole thing was a setup. And then when you get inside the mechanics of what is foreclosure law, you learn that literally there are systems, most notably a group out of Jacksonville, Florida called Black Knight, that's kind of the centerpiece of the database of all mortgages in the United States, that were using just the most basic fraud to foreclose on people's houses. And we're talking about elderly women who couldn't, defend themselves, who lived in their houses for, 5 decades, that sort of thing, that they literally were changing the names on the the agreements and the sheets to basically make up a case that wasn't true. And they did that in tens of millions of cases. I am not exaggerating. This isn't hyperbole. We have the evidence. So, Kevin, knowing that, given your background and what you've come from and what Dan said, take us home right now. What is it that you feel we're up against, and that what we can change with the Clean New Deal?
Well, we have 1 year. 1 year from now, we're going to elect another president. America focuses, the bulk of America focuses went on who should lead our country when there's a presidential election. This is where we have everyone's attention, right? What I hope people who are watching this podcast will take away is, first and foremost, whomever your political leaders are, whomever you voted for, take note whether or not they actually act on your top 10 priorities, whether they align with your values on your top 10 priorities, whatever they are, right? Because the national polling demonstrates that whether you are a Republican, whether you are a MAGA, whether you are a Democrat and stuff like that, the American public has no influence, none, on the public policy of this country, right? And so in recognizing that the politicians we elect, no matter what they tell us when it's time to get elected, are not going to serve us, is that the only way we can reclaim our sovereignty, we can reclaim our country, right, is we elect someone else. The time to break the hold of these two establishment parties is now, right? And the polling data is showing that the American public is in this direction. I mean, you're not going to have a perfect leader. RFK seems to be have at the point right now, because he's at like 22 to 24% of the polling data against Trump and Biden in a three-way race. So he's leading the pack right now. My point is, we're never in modern U.S. history, we got to go back to Teddy Roosevelt to be this close to the prospect of electing someone outside of the duopoly, right? Because they're all bought. Our only opportunity is to look to a leader outside that's not bought, that they're not going to have everything that we all want and stuff like that. But to the extent that they reflect, I'm not advocating for RFK, but at least he's saying, similar to what you said, Patrick, similar to what Dan said, right? That we have so much more in common than the food fight that the powers that be have inspired us to engage in. And so we need to set aside our differences on all these social issues and this and that, and take note of the fact that most of us are suffering. Most of us, the American dream has become an American nightmare. Most of us recognize that this is not the country we signed up for, right? And the thing is, most of us now see who's benefiting from this nightmare that's falling on the rest of us. Let us throw our support. Let us get educated in this year and throw our support behind an independent candidate and elect them president of the United States, and elect independents down the ticket as much as we can, right? Because this is the first necessary step in reclaiming our country. So that's my hope for anyone listening to this podcast.
Well, I'm with you 100% on that, but let me go a little bit longer with this caveat, okay? Because you identified something extremely important in terms of how I've envisioned us building the groundswell in what I call a tidal wave populist crusade to purge corruption and the fascism that it fuels. And to your point about Robert F. Kennedy Jr., it's funny because when he first announced, I was very interested. In fact, I was very close to his campaign. His former campaign director is somebody I've been involved with for some time, and I thought we were going to be involved with. And then all sorts of weird things happened, and I still have some reservations, and I'll get into that in future podcasts. But to your sort of broader point, yeah, look, what we have to do, similar to what the Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King did with the civil rights movement, is identify what the problems are that everybody recognizes. And we have to come up with a sort of a connection to the American soul and the American spirit. And we have to uplift it. And we have to find ways that the commonality that we all understand that, hey, everybody knows that the system is rigged. Everybody knows that someone's getting paid to do something. Everybody knows the system is corrupt, but they don't know the details. And I'll go so far as to say, unfortunately, whether or not, and I know Robert Kennedy knows a lot more than he's saying right now, and that's part and parcel to the problem. He's kind of playing defense to let everybody else watch out, as opposed to having a vision. We have to force the vision. We have to bring the elements of what I've spent 13 years and millions of dollars to aggregate that the Department of Justice and the FBI weren't able to do because of the revolving door of corruption. It's as simple as that. We have the evidence that both of those institutions gave us because of what we've got in the kind. We got suppressed by the machine because the machine cannot let this information to the broader American populace because the jig is up at that point. Yeah. Because everybody comes to understand that, no, we're not a free market economy. No, the law is not equal. And we know exactly why and how it's not. And so that's what we have to do first and foremost. And so, but I am very hopeful that if we were able to build a groundswell with everybody getting this information and distilling it and joining us, and many people like ourselves coming on board and joining the conversation and bringing, their thoughts to it, so we can build a critical mass and we can learn from each other as long as we're building from the core of what the facts are, as opposed to everybody splintering in a million different directions. The system, the way it was designed, always made a lot of sense to me, minus the compromises that Dan effectively addressed at the outset, right? The bottom line is, when you have separation of powers and you have the nature of the principles of the Bill of Rights and the legality of the Constitution, like Dan had pointed out, is the biggest black hole of all, you have to have integrity. You have to have accountability. That's exactly what Jefferson meant. It's a great system if you can keep it, because this whole system was designed to hold power to account, which of course we've just spent the last hour revealing how power was not held to account. So if we can get to that point, what ultimately, and I'll finish with this and I'll give you guys the opportunity for final comments, but what I have to get through to the American people is just the facts. We spent north of $70 trillion since 2009 on guaranteeing this financial system of theft and deception. We could talk all day about zombie companies. We could talk all day about stock buybacks. We could talk all day about commercial real estate. We could talk about bubbles. We could talk about all the entirety of the 2008 great financial crisis, but it's the same thing. $70 trillion in the capacity of rebuilding our public schooling, our infrastructure, and most notably, from what I understand from research that I've done over the years, we could retool the entire grid to go 100% renewable, which just leaves really, the airline industry working through the whole situation. And by the way, I've seen some breakthroughs in terms of fossil fuel and electric flight and all sorts of things. We can find solutions to problems that, walk us back from the cliff of this insanity that we're on in terms of this climate, this perilous climate situation that we're in the midst of, and we can reconfigure the economy to fit and conform to get us off of fossil fuel. What could $70 trillion do instead of backstop, which has created this monstrosity of tyranny? So anyway, that's what my objective is, guys. Closing thoughts.
Well, I guess I'll pipe up first here. I wanted to build upon what Kevin said. He talked about electing independents up and down the ticket. I'm totally in agreement with that. It's easier said than done, because I've done a lot of investigation into how difficult it is for independents to make their mark out there, including talking directly with Ralph Nader on one of my podcasts, who, as you know, ran as under the Green Party for 2004, and I also interviewed his campaign manager, Teresa Amato. And so it's an uphill battle insofar as the president goes. But I tell you where the real power is, at least my opinion, and the place where people can really feel empowered, because right now we have a problem with people not feeling empowered, is in the state houses. Because these are the places where the gerrymandering is done. This is the place where all the manipulation is being done in order to construct this thing we call a federal government. So I would emphasize that state houses are really, if you want to talk to politicians, if you want to run as an independent, definitely a state house position is a place to get your foot in the door, and then you can start working toward a more just system. Get rid of the electoral college. I know it's a big ask, but that's something I think that we need to do. And that's basically it. Just one correction. Actually, I think it was Franklin that said a republic if you can keep it. I don't think it was Jefferson, but I may be wrong about that. But anyways, being an engineer, I felt it necessary that I throw that correction in there. But anyways, that's
corrected by an engineer anytime.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, that's my 2 cents worth. And Kevin, how about you?
Yeah, well, I would just sum it up and put it in historical context. The greatest political coalition that benefited the American people were the New Deal coalition of Franklin Delano Roosevelt that elected a president 4 terms. Okay. Bill Clinton ended the New Deal. Right. We have the formation of a new political coalition that I think can be crystallized behind the clean New Deal. Right. But time is of the essence. We cannot elect another one of these bought leaders and a bought Congress and expect to make any progress. That's the whole Einstein, the definition of insanity thing, right? So let's crystallize. We have the coalition. Look at the American labor movement that's unifying right to work labor in the reddest of states with pro collective bargaining labor in the bluest of states, and they're transforming the labor picture in the country. This is the model is there. People are recognizing how much we do have in common, and it is crystallized in the Clean New Deal. So this could be the vehicle that'll keep the focus, Patrick, right? But we need people up and down the ticket. People are already participating. People are already out there. They're not going to be perfect. We're not going to get it all in one person. But as long as they're not bought, that's got to be our filter, right? As long as they're not already owned, and it's hard to know, but we got to put them through the crucible, right? Then we give ourselves the best opportunity to actually break the chains of that American wealth has put on 95% of the American public, And so that's where I would end my comments.
Well, I love it. And you're right, by the way. I just looked it up. It was Ben Franklin who said that. And, it's a great start, and I really appreciate it, guys. Let's try to make this as consistent as we can, and we can react to all of the things that are happening as it moves forward. But this definitely conveyed what I was hoping that we might be able to achieve today, was a commonality with 3 people that just happened to meet because of social media, and that agreed that, we're picking up the ball to do what we can as American citizens, but we're equipped with extraordinary information. I mean, the bottom line is we've got the evidence of what we're talking about. And, the bottom line is that's what's got to break through this dystopia of this, this machine of, quite frankly, illusion. And that's all it is. And they know where their bread's getting buttered. We all know that, right? So until next time, guys, thank you so much. And we'll encourage the rest of you to tune in. Please reach out to all of us, whenever you feel compelled. We're looking for everybody to get on board and join us. So the more, the better. And if everything we're talking about in any way, speaks your language, we'd love to have you on board. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll talk to you next time.
Thanks, Patrick. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, guys.